Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Over a Beer. This is your pal Nova, coming at you with Blister, and a couple of our close friends in Lumios, D-Rock, and Patrick. Today we're going to talk to you about a subject you might be interested in. What defines an MMO? And we'll try not to argue with each other too much, so let's kick it off. All right, everyone. So we're going to try to define an MMO, and that's not going to be the easiest thing to do. And some of this is personal opinion, of course, but at the end of the day, we had this discussion a little bit before this video, and we thought it might be something you're interested in. As usual, if you have an opinion, throw it down in the comments below.
Before we actually get into defining this, I think it'd be a good idea to have everybody tell the listeners what their favorite MMO ever has been, and then which MMO they have the most time in, so that way they can at least get a kind of an idea of where most of our past has come from and our opinions have come from.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I think that's a good idea. I would easily answer that question with Ultima Online. I spent 5 years playing Ultima, and it was by far the most time invested, my favorite MMO. I played a number of other MMOs, probably a couple dozen or so, smaller stuff, all the way to obvious stuff, World of Warcraft. But Ultima Online is what did it for me.
Is that your favorite, though?
It's my fave, for sure. Hands down. I think it's still the best I've ever played.
Continuing on, D-Rock.
Sweet. My most played is probably Final Fantasy 11. I've been on and off that since it launched. As far as my favorite, it's really hard because they each have things that are great about them and things that really, really suck about them. Which I'm sure we're going to get into. Damn it. I really can't say. I need more time. Need more time to think about that one. Sorry.
So I'm glad I can share all of Nova Punk's favorite games today. But I think my favorite MMO is gonna have to be Eve, just because it's I think everything that I'd want out of an MMO. It's one single server. Everybody interacts with everything. Everybody's the whole game is player driven for all the content. That said, it's obviously really quite a grind, and it's not an easy game to get into the learning curve or to keep up with. So I play it in short bursts. But the game I've actually put the most time into is the polar opposite, would be a theme park MMO with Final Fantasy 14. And yeah, I just spent way too much time in that game.
Way too much.
Way too much.
All right, so for me, it's pretty obvious. The most time I have in any MMO, hands down, is WoW. I've only let my sub lapse twice, and that's right now, and in Warlords of Draenor, and that game's been out for, 14 years now, so yeah, that's definitely the most time I have in any game ever. But my favorite MMO is not WoW, it is Ashram's Call.
Oh, awesome. Okay, interesting.
Curious to pick on that later.
Alright, so my most played MMO has to be Final Fantasy 14.
Oh, really?
Get out of here.
It's either that...
I'm so proud of you.
That's hilarious.
It's either that or WoW, but it's got to be probably the most played, maybe. I don't know.
I'd say Clan Lord is probably close for you.
It would definitely be up there, too. You, too, actually, but... and I couldn't think of when to pick. Like, I kind of move around MMOs a lot. Like, I've been playing a lot of Destiny 2, but I'm starting to move on from that, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. I can't pick a favorite. I'm in the D-Rock shop.
Yeah, can I make a comment on that? I think that's why we're here, because you just referred to Destiny 2 as an MMO, and I would never do that. So I think that sets up the conversation very nicely.
We're going to kick off this little debate here, since Patrick doesn't like Destiny 2. And we're going to kick this off with Blister explaining or stating the quote-unquote definition of an MMORPG.
Yeah, so this is just straight from Google defined. So this is not my own words, this come from the interwebs. An MMORPG is defined as an online role-playing video game in which a very large number of people participate simultaneously.
Now,
Whoa, that's broad.
yeah, and I think we're going to talk a little bit outside of the MMORPG. We're going to probably delve a little bit into first-person shooters and stuff, but we'll assume MMO meaning lots of players at the same time, it said?
A very large number of people participate simultaneously.
Okay, well that's interesting. Because anyway, go ahead, Josh. We're gonna tear into this, I'm sure.
Go for it, Pat.
Yeah, my thought is, well, are we sticking with the notion of MMORPG, or is this just MMO in itself without the RPG moniker attached to it?
When I think of MMO, I don't think of, like, in my opinion, it's always MMORPG, but people just abbreviate it to MMO because
MMO, right?
Yeah, because if you just say MMO, then I mean, are we gonna say that PUBG is an MMO because you have a very large number of people all playing at the same time? You have 100 people in one game.
But that's
not an
exactly
MMO, though, right?
That's exactly what spawns this whole debate.
Exactly. Where I would say we wouldn't call that an MMO, and maybe for the reason you're stating, Drew. Now, I don't think many people would refer to PUBG as an MMO, but I mean, granted, there's more people playing at once than there is, in certain shards of certain MMORPGs. So
when you create a new character in World of Warcraft, you see one other person, not 99.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, RPG is very specific, right? You're playing a role. You're playing an avatar.
Yeah, and you've got the character progression mechanics as well.
Yeah. Does PUBG have that?
Sort of.
No,
Maybe not
I
character
wouldn't call it
progression. It's more like leveling up, I guess.
Yeah, but even when you level up in PUBG, it's just you're not really. There's not really levels in PUBG. I don't even know. Like, you can get loot crates and stuff, but there's no actual character progression of any sort unless you're talking about cosmetics.
So maybe this is where we have to draw the line, and what makes this a little bit easier to define is adding the RPG onto it. Because if you just stick to straight up MMO, then yeah, PUBG, Fortnite, Call of Duty. I mean, there's a lot of examples of games with lots of players interacting at the same time in the same map.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then how can we also settle on what an RPG is? You're playing a role as an avatar. Someone mentioned character progression. Is that a necessity?
Yes.
For RPG, it is. Okay, so it also has to have character progression. So now we've got two kind of tighter defined rules there. Can we find an anomaly example of something or any example where something hits those marks, but we don't consider them MMOs?
Well, I think for you it would be Destiny 2, but Destiny 2 does have roles and there is progression, so I feel it's an MMORPG. It's just a very diluted down version of a MMORPG, but I mean, that's my opinion.
I think Warframe is in the same boat, right?
I would agree, yep.
Okay, can we flip that and take something like Call of Duty multiplayer, which has character progression, and obviously a lot of people playing at once, and call that an MMORPG? You are fitting into a role and to an avatar which has progression over time.
What kind of progression?
What kind of avatar?
Well, probably depends on the Call of Duty game. To be truthful, I haven't played all of them or some of them in quite a while. But last I did play them,
I just played the last ones. So
yeah, do you want to speak on it, Andrew?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I haven't put on a whole bunch of time, so please correct me down in the comments if I'm wrong. But like when you first start out in Call of Duty, you go play just a PvP match like their Overwatch style maps. I don't even remember what it's called now. But when you first start out, you get bare bone kits. You don't get the better guns. You don't get better sidearms. You don't get any of that stuff. You actually have to level up in order to unlock those guns. Then you can actually create custom classes where they use the better guns when you go into a game. So there is some sort of leveling system with character progression, and there are different roles, like how, I mean, it's not so much like you have an actual tank and an actual healer and an actual DPS role, but you do have like 6 or 7, I don't remember how many characters there were, but each character fills a different role. Like their special abilities, kind of like in Overwatch, are all different. So it's kind of like if you take Overwatch but just pure DPSs.
So maybe I found something here that would possibly take Call of Duty out of the running. An MMORPG is a persistent world usually hosted by the game's publisher, which continues to exist and evolve while the player is offline.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would work.
Well, Final Fantasy 14's out. Didn't you queue up for instance.
Yeah, you just sit in your house and you just queue for instances. That's damn accurate, man.
And you never go back and visit old areas. They don't really change.
It's true, but they add new areas and stuff, I guess, so that the quote-unquote world expands or changes. But something that's interesting to me right now...
Then of themselves, like each part is an instance, though. It's not persistent. If it were persistent, it wouldn't have loading screens, right? It's one world because they say it's one world.
Right,
But
yeah, that's
to
valid.
you, the player, it's just a loading.
Yeah.
So Lumios and Nova, what MMO have you guys actually put the most time into then?
Then would be Clanlord probably, or Eve.
I did play a lot of
Be close between them.
Battlegrounds, so I'll go with WoW. So something that's kind of interesting to me here, and I know this is one of the reasons Pat kind of hates on Destiny 2 and the MMO genre, is how many players are actually you interact with, or how many players are on screen. And I find that this is something happening in a lot of traditional MMOs too, if you want to use that term, and even games like Path of Exile, which is considered an MMO by most, where you're kind of by yourself all the time. You even go to games like WoW or Final Fantasy, where you're actually getting sharded, even though you're on the same server as a lot of people. You don't necessarily interact with that many.
Josh, I'm sorry to cut you off. Did you say sharded?
Sharted, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I said
keep going,
sharted, yeah.
sorry. Okay.
So how many people makes it an MMO? Is it the amount of people that actually makes it an MMO, or is it less about the amount of players and more about something else?
Yeah, I think it is less about the amount of players for sure, or at least that's only a small part of it. I don't think that can ever be the complete picture of the definition of an MMO, just because all the game, like you're saying, I mean, there's games out there that, people, there's less people in MMO shards than there are in all these other multiplayer games that no one defines as an MMO. And one notion I had is if the subgenre is more powerfully obvious than the MMORPG aspect, then it'll never be considered an MMO. For example, PUBG's shooter aspect or battle royale aspect overpowers the notion of MMO. And then same thing for something like Call of Duty. The notion of it being a shooter and a multiplayer shooter overpowers the notion of MMO. So I think maybe that's part of it. But
are you feeling that way about Destiny?
Yeah, I kind of am. I think its genre elsewhere is stronger to me than its notion as an RPG or MMORPG.
What is overpowering about it that's pushing it out?
I just want to call it a multiplayer FPS. That's my gut reaction to the game. It doesn't feel like a game I'd ever consent to or want to pay a subscription for, despite the continual updated content.
So I thought personally, I find myself spending at least 30-40% of my time in my inventory, in my character screen, messing around with abilities.
You're not playing Final Fantasy, D.
Right, but what I'm saying is, like, I'm not playing it as a shooter. If it was a shooter, if it was Call of Duty, I'd be just loading into different maps, shooting people for 90% of my time.
But that's an interesting
Not what I'm
point.
doing, yes.
Maybe that's part of it. I don't spend nearly that much time into my. I basically go for highest item level, and as long as the gun doesn't do terrible things and suck, I just keep on going. I don't spend a whole lot of time in inventory management or anything like that.
But I think D, what you're referring to is the RPG elements of a shooter, right? It's an
exactly.
FPS with RPG elements.
Heavy RPG, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not on Pat's side. Like, I think it's an MMO, but I can see his point in that you're basically just running around shooting stuff, and you get item drops, and you can play with your friends easy. But you know,
for sure. But you have classes and abilities like you would in an MMO.
I know, but it just feels like there's so many games that do have classes and abilities now that are not traditional MMOs. Like, that's almost like become part of like what Western games are about. Like, every game's got classes and abilities nowadays, it seems. I just played this game called Final Exam with Josh. It's a little 2D side-scrolling thing. It's got classes and abilities. Like, they all got classes and abilities.
So, if I could jump in, I think for me, what defines more of a pure MMO, and let me preface this by saying, not to keep preaching Eve, and I'm not saying that it is in any way fun or more fun than these other games, but it's much more of a persistent open world where all of your actions impact every other player on the entire server, and you kind of almost go into a gradient of these more obviously theme park type of queue for dungeons, queue for Destiny raids, queue for a Diablo dungeon. It's they're all multiplayer games with your character is growing and evolving, and you can share that with your friends. But I don't know, the more sandbox feels more like a pure MMO to me than a lot of these queue for dungeon games do.
I think that might just be the difference between you kind of touched on it, what a sand park MMO and a theme park MMO are. Sandbox and theme park MMOs are.
but I think the other issue here is that an MMO should have interaction with random people, right? Like in Destiny,
that's a great line.
In Destiny, the best you get is like you do some public events together. But I've never ever had somebody invite me to their group randomly in Destiny. And I think if you look at some other ones like Path of Exile, sort of the same thing. Like, you're just kind of...
Final Fantasy 14's the same thing.
It is.
Absolutely.
You queue for a dungeon solo, you do the dungeon silently. Are you really playing with them?
And, you know, even with WoW, if you look at the PvP servers, you know, it's not the most fun getting ganked, but you feel like you're more part of an online gamer in a real world when somebody else can actually impact your gameplay. Where I think a lot of these other games, it's more of a single player experience that you get to share with your friends a little bit when you queue.
I guess what I started here was going down a whole different road, but
it's a good topic though.
What Lumios was referring to WoW there, he wasn't talking about current WoW, he's talking about older WoW, just so everybody's clear.
The real WoW.
Yeah, real WoW. I like it.
So
it's tough. It's hard because I can play and will likely play through Destiny. I think that's another element that just throws me off from that whole MMO notion. Is like I have no desire and or haven't come across interacting with any other players except for the friends I've directly chosen to play the game with, and so I don't have any other player interactions really, except for seeing him in the distance shooting other stuff. Maybe that's just my choice, but
Pat, I know there's an MMO that you played recently and you enjoyed quite a bit called Neverwinter Online, which I think fits all the molds of the traditional MMORPG that we would slot. It would define it if we looked at it. But how much random player interaction do you get there? You go into dungeons together.
I think, that's probably in large. I mean, I took the time to talk to some people here and there. I talked to a guy from Germany quite a bit. We did like a really difficult raid together. It was like some turtle dragon, and it was just I don't know how many times we wiped and wiped. And anyway, an hour and a half it's like an hour run. It's like brutal. I think an hour and a half, 2 hours later, we beat it, and I spent the rest of the night talking to that guy. But I just don't end up doing things like that in Destiny, where we're tackling these things together in a cooperative manner. And again, maybe that's just by choice on my behalf. It's hard for me to distinguish the difference there. But
I don't think Destiny really builds on that community aspect at all, really. Because, like, take for instance, if you did meet somebody in the open world maps and then wanted to group up, one of you would have to actually load out and then load back in because of the way that their system is set up.
Oh, yeah. True.
I think a big issue with it too is just the casual gamer now. They just want to go in, they have 20 minutes of their own time to spare, so they just want to go in, do something real quick and get out. And they're not looking for that interaction because they're just, I'm here to do my thing. I don't care about you.
They don't want to
get
my
shit done.
They don't want to be forced to do
it. They don't, yeah, exactly. Like, none of these games are building off of community aspects of their game. I know that we have other MMOs in the pipeline that are supposedly going to be doing that, but will it actually do that? We still have to see how that's all going to play out. The last MMO that I remember having that feel is like what Lumios was saying. It was in WoW. It was way back. Wrath of the Lich King was probably the last time I played that game that I really felt like there was even a community left in the game.
But to his point, you can whip open Eve right now and be destroyed by somebody, right?
Yeah, I mean, and you could say the same thing in WoW. Like, I could go in and I could throw PvP on and go start leveling a new character, and if I go to the wrong place, I'm going to get my ass handed to me, and I'm just going to constantly be killed by the opposing faction. But, I mean, for the majority of my time, and I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Lumios, but the majority of your time in EVE, I'm going to guess you don't run into other people. It's more of a rare occurrence that you run into somebody else that's actually going to interfere with what you're trying to do.
It depends what you're doing. So I most recently got blown up while I was just doing some solo PvE content, just doing some exploring, and I just warped into the wrong system, and some people were there waiting for me and blew me up and lost quite a bit of ISK, is the money in the game. So yeah, there's some real consequences in running into people and a lot of unexpected stuff there. But
so I'm gonna kind of wrap us back in here, guys, because we're like 20 minutes in here. We really started talking a lot about community and MMOs, and I think that's something everybody wants. And maybe if we go by that measure, then there's not really any MMOs out there right now. So what really defines an MMO, and what I think I got most from this, and I'll have you all kind of give you a wrap up after, but is we want a game where we interact with random people. It's a persistent world, and we definitely want character building and RPG elements so that we feel like we're playing a character in this world and progressing in that world, and maybe making changes to the world if you're playing a sandbox game where you can actually make changes or affect the world. I think that's kind of the three major points that I heard from this conversation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And just to throw my final 2 cents in there, yeah, I think just the fact that we're having this discussion as gamers of multitudes of decades says that I think ultimately what defines an MMO is a bit subjective, in that here you guys are just as seasoned gamers as I am, and you're saying this game's an MMO, and I'm saying, well, I don't think it is. So I think it's a bit subjective to what you are looking for. But I think what really drew me into the conversation was whether Destiny 2 was worthy of a sub. But I think that's a whole other debate that I'll save for later, maybe. And
yeah, I think that would be another 20 minutes.
Yeah. So, yep, that's all I got. Thank you, Josh.
I think you guys hit on something with the community thing. It just made me think back to like old MMOs. Even I've experienced it in WoW, and then way back in Clan Lord, but even in Final Fantasy 14, where you have actual servers and communities doing like weird things. Like if you guys have ever been like on WoW, where they'd have a bunch of people holding vigil for somebody, or like a player that they knew out of game, or we've seen other games where people are making queues because the Final Fantasy 14 server couldn't handle the instances. I think stuff like that makes the persistent world kind of cool. It makes the community feel, like something, as opposed to just individual queues and dungeons.
It makes you feel like you're actually playing with other people, meaning you're actually playing an MMO and not playing an open world by yourself.
Right, exactly. And that's something I like Destiny, and I think it does fit the mold, if only barely. But I don't see something like that happening. But that's all I got. Thanks, guys.
All right, so I agree on all 3 points that Nova said. I think it pretty much hits it on the head. I just want to repeat what I was saying earlier is when we say MMO, I think 99% of the time we mean MMORPG. We don't mean actually just MMO and acronym. It's MMORPG.
I'm kind of biased on the whole like needing developers to force players into doing certain things, whether it's playing together, interacting, building the community. Like, I feel like the game needs to be built that way. If the game isn't built that way, it's not going to happen. Like, the players are going to do whatever is the most, whatever's the quickest way to victory, right? Like that's what they're going to do to win. If that requires not communicating, if that requires cheating the system that the developers made, then that's the way they're going to go. And that's going to be indicative of what the game ends up being, right? They may call it an MMORPG, but maybe it goes off in a different direction, and maybe the players feel like it's not an MMORPG or whatever. So, in my opinion, that's kind of developers need to think about these things and come up with like a system of design that builds the communities, that forces people to play together, that forces these instances where people take these characters that they've built up themselves by playing the game, and they have to force interaction and force these events that sort of drive the community, that make the communities, that make the the instant world, or whether the world is persistent or whatever. Like, it just makes it feel like it's being interacted with, it's being played. That's my opinion on it.
Well said.
Yeah, really good point. For sure. I think that's probably exactly why we saw all that interaction in games like Clan Lord and Ultima and Vanilla WoW, and don't see some of that. I think when you get into the quality of life stuff that just gets you to the fastest, quickest path to victory, then you lose some of that interaction.
All right, well, thank you guys. It was a pleasure. We'll try to do this again soon. And for you viewers, please throw your comments below. Let us know where we went wrong, or what your opinions are on what defines an MMORPG.
Also, let us know if you like hearing these other guys talk with us, because we like talking with them. We want to know if you guys like them too, though.
So thanks, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yep, thank you. Beers up.
Thanks.
Hey, it's Radit here. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel. We put out multiple new videos each week, and we appreciate all of your support. Thanks for watching, everyone, and cheers.